Hello everyone, welcome back. Obviously, now that we're in Snezhnaya, we have a new Traveller to play around with. I tend to also call them MC, main character of course. I say finally because, as you would have noticed, we didn't actually get a new Traveller during the Not Cry cycle. There was no such thing as a Lunar Traveller, unfortunately. But now we're in the nation of Cryo, so the Cryo Traveller is a thing, and as you may have heard, Cryo Traveller is actually pretty damn strong. As you may have heard, there's actually a couple of things that have come together to give CMC a solid amount of stacks. Ostensibly, the Traveller would have resonated with all the elements by now, because we're in Snezhnaya, and since the end of the Not Cry Archon quest, the Traveller actually gets a bunch of stats depending on the elements that they've resonated. You do actually have to complete the Not Cry Archon quest to get this buff, by the way. Animo gives 10% crit rate, Geo gives 20% defense, Electro gives 20% ER, Dendro gives 60% EM, Hydro gives 20% HP, Pyro gives 20% attack, and now Cryo gives 20% crit damage. There's also this weird thing about charging up the Traveller's charge attack, and once per rotation it can actually do a lot more damage. We also now, in the Snezhnaya Archon quest, get access to a signature sword for the Traveller. It's called Exaphane's Blade. Exaphane's Blade? Let me know how you pronounce it in the comments below. You'll get this at some point during the Snezhnaya Archon quest. I won't spoil where. It's got mid-base attack and mid-crit rate, but it also gives plus 6% crit damage for every element resonated. Now, there are 7 elements total, so long as you've resonated with all of them, you get plus 42% crit damage. The passive gives plus 16% attack that goes up with refines. Apparently this is going to max out at plus 40 attack percent, we'll just have to see, but the trigger is just needing you to attack something. The passive will also give you plus 5 energy whenever that happens on a 5-second cooldown, and keep in mind, these passives, they only work on the Traveller. Essentially, the Traveller is now a lot stronger compared to the start of the Not Cry Archon quest, and that's been huge for the Traveller. But this time around, the Cryo Traveller can also enable stellar reactions, and also do direct stellar damage. So because of all of that, the Cryo Traveller has actually become a really strong character. So, before we get into the experience of playing the MC, I just want to remind you all to like the video and subscribe to the channel, so that your support can help combat the YouTube algorithm. I do want to look at 3 different Traveller playstyles, but that ended up being way too long of a video, so we're just going to focus on 2 Stellar Traveller playstyles for this video. Let's start off with StellarConduct. In this case, CMC is an on-fielder. No ifs, ands, or buts. There is a stipulation in CMC's skill where being inside the StellarConduct field actually stops the skill from doing off-field hits entirely, and instead does coordinated hits with the Traveller's own normal attacks, charge attacks, or plunges. So essentially, the gameplay loop for StellarConduct CMC is skill into ult and then a bunch of normal attacks. This tends to not matter in the first rotation, I think, but basically hitting enemies builds up Frost Glow, which is of course a great big star thing that you can see next to the Traveller, which then of course buffs their ult damage. But there's also a passive to do with the Traveller's charge attacks that basically says when your team does stellar damage, you build up 3 stacks once per 2 seconds, and after you have all 3, the Traveller's next charge attack does plus 140% attack scaling and does direct stellar damage based on which state they're in. In StellarConduct teams, we're looking at direct stellar conduct damage coming from the likes of themselves, Chi-Chi, Miko, Odette, etc, etc. Some folks have rightly mentioned that it's borderline impossible to find the visual indicator that your big charge attack is ready to go. Basically, you're looking for the Traveller's right wrist to start getting really starry. So, a DPS rotation that seems to be the most consistent for me is when you swap to the Traveller, skill into ult, then do 1 full normal attack chain, then do 4 normal attacks, which is 1 less than the full chain, then do your charge attack. Special charge attack has more hit lag than a regular one, but it will do a lot more damage, so it's pretty good to get that out. Today I learned that Lumine actually has a stronger charge attack than Ether. Slightly stronger, but stronger nonetheless. It's a curious decision by Hoyo. I'm not entirely sure what they were thinking, but there we go. Obviously, for a StellarConduct Traveller team, we're going to need some Electro. The most obvious choice is the illustrious in the extreme, Her Royal Holiness, the God of Sass, Yai Miko the Wise and Beautiful, whose constellations can also buff CMC's own personal DPS by quite a lot. C1 gives plus 50 StellarConduct percent, and of course C2 gives plus 200 EM, so long as your turrets are near each other. Alternatives can include C6 Bather, who can give Red Shred. Traveller is a melee character, so the one you'll be attacking with the Traveller will typically have that Red Shred applied to them. We could always try and play Fischl the Fraudulent. The Beneficor also works. Alyosha, especially with high constellations, can be a solid alternative, I guess. To fill out the rest of the team though, Odette is of course the newest character in the game and is another obvious choice. She has off-field direct StellarConduct damage via her Shadow Clone Jutsu, aka Dance Doubles, and when she's off-field, everyone else on the team gets plus 60 Stellar percent, which she actually loses out on. Alternatively, if you want to bring someone else, you can bring Rosaria if by some sheer Christmas miracle your team actually needs more crit rate. I'll talk about this when I get to builds, but I already struggled to not overcap crit rate with the Cryo Traveller. Burst Ganyu, I guess, works, and Layla is another option. We're not exactly spoiled for choice with regards to off-field Cryo characters who are not called Odette. And finally, there's always the healer and shielder slot, because I prefer to recommend teams with at least some kind of defensive utility, unless of course it's Imaginary Theatre, for example, and you're out of options. But either way, I personally prefer C2 R1 Shillidan, and she seems to be my strongest option. The crit damage on both MC and Odette is actually pretty damn strong, and the cooldown reduction on Miko's burst does mean I can run some very fast rotations that always gives me a lot of overwhelming Electro Aura to activate the StellarSwirl buff, or specifically Miko's DPS. But we do have a lot of alternatives to play around with. Chi-Chi gives everyone plus 50 Stellar percent. If you've lost enough 50-50s and you actually managed to get her C6, which so far I haven't, 4 hits of direct Stellar damage will get a flat damage buff. I believe this pretty much gets used up by someone like Miko during her setup, but I think ideally you use it on whoever on your team has the most crit value. Now, if you happen to be a C6 God Miko main, then yeah, no matter what, it's gonna be her. Diona can give the on-fielder plus 200 EM and plus 40 Stellar percent. Escoffier is actually also pretty damn solid. For reference, with R1 Escoffier, I get around 226k DPS compared to C2 R1 Shillidan going for around 266k DPS. I think most of that is because I didn't have Red Shred on God Miko with Escoffier. I feel like it's also worth pointing out Shenyun, because when you use the Traveller's skill, you can get cryo-infused plunges as well. It's an idea. It's not necessarily the strongest idea, but if you're not enjoying their normal attack gameplay, which, fair, the Travellers tend to have the most basic looking normal attack chain after Bennett the Borings, then perhaps you can give Stellar Plunge Traveller a go. But only if you already have Cloud Retainer. I wouldn't go out of my way to get the bird just to be doing something like this. Basically, the Miko-lists among us are not entirely out of options. There are still some alternatives, but it seems pretty clear that Miko is Queen, Miko is Mother, Miko is God. There are rumors that Meteor might potentially be an option down the line, but we'll just have to see. Like I mentioned, my strongest StellarConduct Traveller team is actually doing some 266k DPS, which does seem to be notably stronger than my strongest Cyno team, actually. So, I'm sorry to say this, but even though Cyno is a far more interesting and fun character to play, the Cryo Traveller is actually cooking him in the meta. Now, I will cover Sandy next video, but spoiler alert, Cryo Traveller actually isn't that far away from her either, but Sandy is a bit stronger. Meanwhile, we have the StellarSwirl Traveller, and in this case, the Traveller is an off-fielder. So just to start off with, CMC's gameplay is really straightforward in these teams. Skill, ult, charge attack, move on. On the first rotation, obviously you won't be able to do that big charge attack, but every subsequent rotation you will be able to just swap to her, do that, done. But no matter what I try right now, StellarSwirl teams are still pretty cooked. Part of that is, I think, because I don't have Mizuki, so I'm missing an on-fielder that can do massive amounts of damage. It's weird. I can get StellarSwirl to reach around 60k DPS, but even when I tried to make the most meta-looking team I have available right now with like Sandy, Odette, CMC, and Kazuha for that continued off-field swirling, I only reach 88k DPS. The gap isn't even huge. If I were to run, let's say, Infinite Energy Sucrose so that I can use her Butterfly every rotation, again for that off-field cryo swirling, I still only get 107k DPS, and obviously this team doesn't actually exist because for it to work, I would need 3000 ER on Sucrose. But essentially, the team building is probably a lot more straightforward. You definitely want to avoid any Electro on the team, because as soon as you, by any mere accident, get a StellarConduct field, well, suddenly the Traveller is back to being an on-fielder. You can, however, bring Hydro, which kind of would make a Stellar Freeze team, but right now the Hydro options are all kind of just doing their own thing. I think that's why Vodyanitsa is currently made the way she is, so that she can be that dedicated StellarSwirl / Stellar Freeze technically character. But I don't know, she seems a little bit uninteresting to me, so let me know in the comments how you feel about that. For now, it seems like the make or break for StellarSwirl is to do with whether or not you have Mizuki. So for those watching, let me know in the comments how much DPS you're getting in your StellarSwirl team if you have a Mizuki on your account. I, however, have seen the Vesna leaks, and she seems like she's going to be a lot of fun to play with, so I'm going to go get her. We'll just see how well she performs on top of all of that. Speaking of Vesna, there's also the curious case of the buffing options, because Vesna seems to move around a lot, which actually screams to me that she can fully maintain Iansat Nightsoul bar. Look, whilst the damage percent from Iansat C6 is kind of worthless, the flat attack buff being always at its maximum does actually sound quite tempting. So I'm keen to see whether, let's say, a Shilin and Iansat combo might not be the worst idea in the world. But Iansat is Electro, so like I said, we're going to be seeing a few StellarConduct fields from time to time. It's probably going to be a problem. But aside from that, the most obvious choice is C6 Photozan or C4 Gene if you're desperate. There are a couple of options there to play with. I feel like when it comes to Cryo off-fielders, pretty much Odette and the Cryo Traveller are similar enough, which is why I have been opting to treat Odette as a StellarConduct off-fielder and CMC as a StellarSwirl off-fielder. That way, I don't have to swap and change their build so much in the grand scheme of things. So I'm not entirely sure if there's any need to have both of them on the team for more Cryo up though. Guess we'll have to find out when I get Vesna. Either way though, if you need them, the Cryo off-fielders and healers that I mentioned with the StellarConduct teams, they tend to work pretty decently well in StellarSwirl teams. At least in theory anyway. I'll find out for sure when I get Vesna. Building the Traveller, I think, is pretty straightforward. In StellarConduct, you just want to use the StellarConduct DPS set. In StellarSwirl, I don't think there's any scenario where you're not on the Stellar Support set. I suppose you could put it on someone like Photozan, since she will be triggering StellarSwirl while off-field. In that case, maybe a 2-piece attack build, or even the Hexarate DPS set, is actually a good idea for the Cryo Traveller. Attack crit is pretty much the way to go. Crit damage is ideal, especially for the StellarConduct set, because the Traveller will actually have a lot of crit rate at baseline. First off, every character starts at 5% crit rate. There's another plus 10% from unlocking AMC, like I mentioned earlier. The sword gives plus 33%. There's another 16% coming from the StellarConduct 4-piece effect. And then finally, there's another 15% coming from Cryo Resonance, which basically means without even building any main or substats, CMC starts with effectively 79% crit rate. So you actually only need 21% from substats before you start overcapping. On the Stellar Support set though, you only start with 48% crit rate, so you do have a bit more breathing room to not overcap. Oh, one last thing. Let's just go through the Traveller's constellations. I have C2 by finding enough Cryoculi, and so can you. C1 gives CMC even more energy to the point where I swear the ER requirements are like non-existent. You already get plus 20% ER from unlocking EMC, and then on top of that, the sword will give you some energy, and on top of that, CMC's burst is only a 60 cost ult. C2 gives the on-fielder plus 60 EM or 120 EM if they deal direct stellar damage or trigger a stellar reaction. C3 is skill levels, probably available in a couple of patches this time. C5 is ult levels, probably won't be available for a while. C4 makes her skill last 3 seconds longer, we're going from 12 seconds to 15 seconds. I feel like this is going to be more of a huge deal for future StellarSwirl teams, i.e. with Vesna. We'll see who else is actually going to care about this. And finally, C6 makes it so that the Frost Glow stacks that you've used for your ult, the ones that actually buff your ult damage, the ones you use up will also give the team up to plus 40 stellar % damage. You need to have used 8 stacks, which I believe is actually quite trivial, because so long as you're not randomly missing enemies to attack with the Cryo Traveller's skill, usually every rotation, they'll be able to get all 8 Frost Glow stacks back. Okay, I think that'll do it for today's video. In summary, StellarConduct Traveller is quite strong, even if they're not the most interesting character to play in the game, which of course is kind of doubly nuts when you consider that they are the definitive free-to-play character of all time. But StellarSwirl Traveller is basically missing that on-fielder that they want to support. Obviously, my experience is currently heavily skewed in favor of StellarConduct Traveller, thanks of course to God Miko, but either way, they are free, the Travelers, so I do recommend building them. Just keep an eye on which talent books you need, though as the Traveller famously needs all of them and each talent level uses a different book, so live farming for them was quite confusing. When it comes to future-proof and all that jazz, I mean, the Tsaritsa will show up eventually, most likely as a playable character. Typically, Travelers are emulating the Archons, and the Archons will of course be stronger, so I guess if you, for whatever reason, really don't want to build your Travelers, then I guess you can hold out for whatever the hell the Tsaritsa does. Although I suppose for off-fielding shenanigans, especially for StellarSwirl teams, we kind of already have the Archon equivalent in the form of Odette. She is already a really, really solid cryo off-fielder that does stellar damage, so there we go. Let me know about all of this in the comments below. Are you playing Cryo Traveller, or maybe the other Travelers? Because keep in mind, the weapon Exophane's Blade is actually generic enough that it could work on all of the Travelers, so are you playing some of the other Travelers? Let me know in the comments. I know that there are Traveller mains out there in the community. I'm sure they're basically eating very, very good these days, so let me know if you're one of them and how your experience has been / improved in the comments below. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action, and as always, until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
I'd still be shackled.
I'm always watching. Emerge, right here. Emerge.
Cold resolve.